Hello and welcome to sim.bc where it is 11:45 and today we're going to talk about Hofstedes' model of cultural dimensions. Again! I know! But I love him, so I have absolutely no problem at all with that. And simultaneously I'm making some food in the background, just boiling some stuff. Hopefully it won't make a sound of it. Might do. I'm sorry if it does, and oh sorry. Having me watch on again. So badly prepared these days. Am I right? Approaching 100 videos and yet haven't learned? You know, life is for learning, isn't it? For life's lessons and stuff like that. No, but seriously, without any further ado, let's get into them. And why then? I can start with introducing why are we discussing Hofstede's 4 dimensions again? 4 core cultural dimensions. The first 4. Well, it's because last time when I discussed them from the perspective of, well, what should we say, the general perspective of what culture is, the working culture, the national culture, corporate culture, what your culture is, do you identify with culture, the different individuals within culture, and culture. I've said it so many times now that it sounds stupid in my own head. I don't know, like, why is the word like it is? Culture, anyway, but today we're going to tackle culture from the perspective of negotiations. Yay! And I think I've done this shortly, in a very concise video, in a very fast manner. But since this is also a part of the PowerPoint that we're going to go through, I thought, hands down, why not go through it again, even if we've done it before? Because it can only get better, right? It can only get more clear. Hopefully, it can only get more clear. But just bear with me, So, which are the 4 core cultures or the 4 core cultural dimensions yet again. So we're starting off with either I'm going to list them now. So individualism versus collectivism, that's the first one. Power distance is the second one. Career success / quality of life, or masculinity / femininity, or goal orientated versus process orientated. Probably going to use career success or quality of life in this one. But, my natural terminology probably will shift all over the place. And then uncertainty avoidance. Now, what do I mean when we're talking about negotiations? Well, because let's starting off with individualism versus collectivism. For instance, just going to read this note here. Negotiations from collectivist cultures will depend on cultivating and sustaining a long-term relationship. And this we've mentioned before, if you come from a very collective culture, collective nature. You look at the collective, you think about all the people, and you try, apparently, when you work in negotiation, generally, you try to work for long-lasting relationships, right? If you see someone, you think, oh, that's a good lad from that company, I'm going to work with him, and I'm going to try to work with him, in the future, for the foreseeable future, lay down the foundations for a good groundwork, lay down the foundations for a long-lasting relationship. Probably, as we discussed yesterday, not looking at a pragmatic view when entering a new negotiation or a new culture, but rather looking at the individual, trying to really understand who this person is, even though that will take longer time, but as I said, you're aiming for the long term. Whereas, individualism, negotiators from individualistic cultures may be more likely to swap negotiators, and I feel myself inclined there. I heard once a couple of days ago that the people who are bad at negotiations are the people who often shift jobs due to trying to get away from a future conflict, or the people who shift group works all the time. And I feel like I'm consistently not working with the same people in my groups because I'm trying to avoid conflict. And the way that I'm working, it's probably better if I can just use them than throw them away. No, of course not. I love working with the same people over a long period of time. That's just a different experience. It's just that at my home university we haven't been provided with that experience that much, but here we have, and I think it's a better way of working if you work with a team for a longer amount of time, because you're learning their strengths and their weaknesses, and then you can put them in where they best fit. And you don't have to rely on their resume or whatever, the CV, or what they state that they're good at, because now you have actually observed in reality what they are actually good at and what they're not good at. Anyway, but I feel like before I came here, I was so inclined to this individualistic way of thinking that I would rather argue with you because I'm such a distributive person in in my soul that I'm going for the win-lose situation. But I thought that until I arrived in France, because as I've studied negotiation techniques, I realized I'm much more of a collectivistic person. I like having the same negotiator at all times because I'm apparently more inclined to do a win-win integrative situation. Negotiation. Why? Well, I honestly quite don't know, really. Since both France and Sweden is quite individualistic, whereas I thought that they were collectivistic. But anyway, but yeah, apparently the collectivistic way of doing things suits me better. But yeah, so collectivism, you aim for long-lasting relationships, and individualism, you aim to short-term gains, so to say, and shift the person that you negotiate with. Power distance then, just gonna check on my food. Looks great, looks great. Yeah, so power distance. Negotiators from comparatively high power distance cultures may need to seek approval from their supervisors, superiorities, whatever, more frequently and for more issues, leading to a slower negotiation process. As I discussed before, in Sweden, however, we have a very team-based, low power distance, very decentralized structure, and many people in Sweden actually say, well, that makes it so that everybody's opinion should be heard, you shouldn't step on anybody's toes, hence it will take longer to make a decision. However, according to this, the Hofstedes dimensional culture of negotiations, it actually takes arguably and theoretically longer to do a negotiation when you have a high power distance, because of the reason that when you discuss, what should we say, small things on a lower level in the organization, you don't take the top decisions, but the people at the top needs to make the decisions for the people down here. But they also have to constantly ask this superior person, like, can we do this? Is this okay? And it might take a couple of, I don't know, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, maybe a year. No, but you get what I'm saying. Depending on how good the communication is between the lower and the higher tier of workers, or in the hierarchy of the structure of the corporation, it may slow down the negotiation process. So high power distance is viewed, at least in my opinion, from where I'm from, it's viewed as being more efficient, but according to Hofstede, it's less efficient because they have to ask their superior, I don't know, the supervisors all the time, like, is this good, is this bad? However, the decentralized way of doing it, the low power distance, make it so that the individual team leader has more power to make a decision. However, it has a stigma, in Sweden at least, to be that it's slower and more inefficient, which, you know, I tended to agree with before I came here, and now I've completely changed my perspective. Anyway, moving into career success slash quality of life, or masculinity slash femininity, or goal orientated slash process orientated, or whatever you want to call it. Anyway, increasing the competitiveness when negotiators from career success cultures meet, so masculinity, and negotiators from quality of life, femininity cultures, are more likely to have empathy for the other party and seek compromise. Now, this is back again to the macho culture, you know, right? When you are from the macho culture, the goal is very important. You want to do it as best as you can for you. It's a very distributive, that word. It's a very win-lose situation anyway, from in nature, that you want to get as much value as you can, right? It is very competitive. Whereas in the femininity part side, you look for a win-win, or arguably a lose-lose. Because if you go for a compromise, then both of you have not attained your initial goal, because you've compromised your goal. So technically, you can also say that you're in a lose-lose situation, because nobody gained what they thought they would gain. However, you can also say that if you have lots more of empathy, you can move in, have a better way of establishing trust between the parties, and therefore you can generate more alternatives that will potentially lead to generating more value, and then you can distribute that value, as I've talked about before in integrative negotiations. Moving in then to uncertainty avoidance. Negotiations from high uncertainty avoidance cultures are less comfortable with ambiguous situations and are more likely to seek stable rules and procedures when they negotiate. Now, a typical way of looking at this is that if you take in the US, for instance, or the Western world in general, And no, when I'm saying the Western world, I don't mean the modern world, because there are lots of modern stuff all over the globe now. But what I mean is, Western Europe, the US, Canada, for instance. And that's the Western world for me, at least, how it is categorized. Even though South America should technically be in there as well, and Mexico. But, when I view it, I don't view it like that. I view the term as a collective word for... You know what I mean, you know what I mean. Anyway, when you go through negotiations, at least in Western Europe and I think in the US as well, you go through it from top to bottom. Basically, we have 10 points. Let's start with point 1. Let's work our way through 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then let's sign the contract and we're all good. Whereas, I've heard, since I have mates from the Middle East, that in the Middle East, you tend to work more with, okay, well, let's start with the point 2. Because that's the point that's most, the best point for us, or the point that we want to push. Maybe it's the point that we want to spend the most time on because it's the most important point. And then we might move to point 6 and negotiate that. And you keep it very, informal until it comes to actually signing the contract. And that's also in the way of their culture. I would assume that they have a very hard time saying no because they're so polite in nature, that most of them tend to say, yes, we can do that, that works, until you're supposed to sign the contract. And then they say, no, we actually have to renegotiate things in the contract because I'm not, comfortable with it. But that's also a problem when a Western meets a Middle Eastern negotiator, that the Middle Eastern negotiator might feel like, yeah, I'm going to be polite, while the Western negotiator might say, oh, I worked through all the points, even though it wasn't in the right order, but we've gone through it, and now we're just going to sign, and I'm done. Whilst the other party might say, well, actually, I'm not agreeing with everything that we've said so far. But yeah, that's also a different view of how the culture influences the negotiations, how the culture influences the corporate culture. Is being polite important? Is being successful more important? Not successful, but being more direct in your business, like in your talking, your voice, in your voicing your opinion more directly. So I would say that Western high uncertainty avoidance, we like to work through it in a fashionable matter. We want to have it all structured. We want to take all of the chances, and we want to be really clear that when we decide on a point, that's basically formal. We basically decided in a formal way, even though it is arguably better to work through all points informally, and then when you sign, make everything formal. But many people I know like to work through it formally so that it's done, so there's no chance of it getting backlashed or getting back to that point because you're satisfied with that point. Let's move on. Whilst in them, for instance, the Middle East, and I'm not from the Middle East, I haven't been to the Middle East, but I've heard a lot of stuff from my mates that are from the Middle East, and I hope that they're representative of that culture. And I've heard lots of stereotypes as well, that they are more polite and work through things in a different manner. So they work through, as I said, point 2, point 6, point 8, I don't know, point 1, and then point 2, point 3, 4, 10. You know what I mean? In a more, I would say that they tend to have lower uncertainty avoidance, and therefore they have this informal structure at a longer time until they're about to sign. But then since people there are so polite, they don't tend to say no. It's the same with the Japanese, apparently I've heard. So yeah. Which one is better? Depends, I would say, on what you're supposed to do. If you have time restraints, I would argue that the Western way of doing things is better. However, if you have the time to actually go through it, I would say this is the very Swedish way of doing it. I would take the Middle Eastern approach, because you take the points that are most valuable to you and that will take up the most time first. So that's the most important parts done, and then the rest of the negotiation will fall under what you have discussed and what you have come to agree upon. So I think that I would, in a collectivist view, long-term, long-lasting relationships, not the pragmatic view, I would argue that the Middle Eastern way is way better actually, and have way more pros than cons, in my opinion. But then you also have to take into consideration the potential cultural clash, and it also depends if they're individualistic, collectivistic, if they're masculinity or femininity, orientated, or if they have a high or low power distance in that specific corporation. Also plays a big role. So that was everything. Just a rehash from Hofstedes' model of cultural dimensions when it comes to negotiations. And if you don't know the cultural models or the dimensions, then I've made 6 different videos on that with a review as well of the entire project of going through them all. So I will leave that in the description, and have a nice one, mate, and I'll see you tomorrow.